But I write and I eat with left.
Good evening. I call this Iowa City Community School Board meeting on Tuesday, January 28th, 2020 to order. My name is Janet Godwin, and I want to thank those in the audience, those watching on YouTube, and those following on Twitter for joining us tonight. I'll start by introducing those at the table with me. To my right, Superintendent Steve Murley, Directors Lisa Williams, Paul Ressler, Sean Eystone. To my left, Ruthina Malone, JP Clausen, Charlie Eastham, and Kim Coleman, Recording Secretary. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak, they need to complete a speaker form found at the table in the lobby and turn it in. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting during our community comment section of the agenda. And with that, we will move into community comment. First up, we have Royce-Ann Porter, followed by Marion Coleman.
Royce-Ann Porter, 136 Upper News Court, Iowa City. To the Iowa City Community School District from the Black Voices Project. The Black Voices Project has observed a troubling climate in some of our schools. We are here to inform you that we have serious concerns about policies that don't appear to be followed. In our opinion and our perspectives, there appears to be unlawful employment practices. These include disparate treatment and impact, hostile work environment, and lack of adherence to basic civil rights as defined in Title VII. We have reason to believe staff of color are subject to retaliation and reprisals. In a number of instances, building staff have refused to accept leadership from a principal of color. At least 3 of these were women, which also brings up a potential violation of Title IX. In addition to disrespectful and insubordinate behavior from staff, these leaders of color have faced micromanagement of their leadership by the district administration. Their judgment has been second-guessed and their leadership undermined when district administrators receive and validate complaints from parents and building staff rather than dismissing petty complaints or directing the complainant back to the principal to address the issue. Iowa City Community School District administration is not consistently, adequately, and ethically recognizing the rights of teachers and building administrators of color. This has led to negative effects on their physical and mental health. In some cases, our Black teachers and principals have been driven to retain legal counsel and even to sue the district over these unfair practices. This has caused the district to divert funds from legal settlements, which is a direct impact on students when those funds are not available for learning materials and curricular offerings. In addition, many of these leaders leave the district because of this demeaning treatment, depriving our students of strong role models of Black leadership. We have questions about the exit interviews conducted with these leaders who have chosen to depart. We are here to serve notice that this pattern of behavior must be addressed and remedied. Our teachers and leaders of color will not live in fear of retaliation and experience negative effects on their mental and physical health. These are highly qualified professionals who should not have to choose between their job and their self-esteem and integrity. We expect that this will be placed on the official agenda for the next Board of Directors meeting. We expect that the district will bring in neutral, expert investigators from the Iowa Board of Education, people who are trained in conducting the sort of audit that will reveal the roots of this pattern of mistreatment and offer concrete actions to remedy it. For too many years, the Iowa City Community School District administration has made excuses for this pattern. Nearly everyone in the current administration has either participated or is subordinate to those who have, which makes all current administrative staff ineligible to complete this task with integrity. The Black Voices Project is committed to advocacy and support for educational leaders of color. We expect the Iowa City Community School Board of Directors and administration to do the same. Additional topics we would like for further discussion is to talk about Thursday staff development training for teachers to understand expectations for ethical training, implicit bias requirement, and the Iowa Code Multicultural Gender Fair. We also would like to discuss the district's requiring training and evidence of implementation. Is this being done? And respectfully, the Black Voices Project, I am the president, Roy Sam Porter, and we have been dealing with this issue probably 4 or 5 years now. I talked to Chase, I've been in meetings. Chase has come to the Black Voices, Chase as a liaison. This has been going on for many years, and it's time for us to do something about it because this is systemic across the board. This is not your first time hearing this. You know what's going on, and we need to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Royce-Ann. Marion Coleman, followed by Mary Kenyon.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Marion Coleman, and I spent almost 40 years in the school district in all kinds of roles, as a teacher, as a principal, as a central office administrator. I come tonight to talk to you, thank you, you're welcome, a little bit about the human side of what happens to people of color who come to the district with great expectations. Growing up in South Carolina, my parents always said, you gotta get your education. This was during the Civil Rights Movement. So I came to Iowa City thinking, after being involved in the Civil Rights Movement, some of that information and some of the ways that people felt would be transferred. So a lot of times I walked around and I thought, I'm Marion Coleman. I was in the Civil Rights Movement. And the response I got was, who is she? Okay, but I was a good employee. And I experienced some of the things that people are talking about today. And I came here in 1969. That's way too long. But I also have had some experience working with and talking to our current leaders in the Iowa City Community School District. And I fear for them. The reason I fear for them doesn't have anything to do with physical safety. It has to do with emotional and the mental impact. What I often say is they may leave because they don't feel that they have been given the opportunity to show you what skilled and talented people they are. I say the song may end, but in this instance, the melody is still going on. I request from you who have parents to look at what you want for your children and think about the folks that you see as adults here in your school district and where they came from and how they were motivated, inspired to be leaders, inspired to be a part of one of the greatest school districts in Iowa. I enjoyed working in Iowa. I had to fight. But I had the opportunity to learn how to fight from a group of people who trained us when I was in college and undergraduate at Morris College. Dr. Martin Luther King, he had a cadre of people that would come around to the historically black schools and help us know how to do things appropriately. I don't want to go over time, but I want you to think about how you would want your child to be treated in an environment that's different from what they grew up in, with expectations, with self-esteem, with experience, with talent, with skills. I want you to think about what you would feel like if you had a child in their 30s or 40s coming back home. This does not just affect the person involved. It affects the families. It affects the moms, the dads, the children. And guess what? The impact on our students is tremendous. because if you are stressed out, if you are second guessing, if you have no advocate that you can count on, and if you are in fear, it's very difficult to bring yourself to that environment every day. Please take a look at what we've experienced. I have the wall of shame that I read once at another meeting with the 35, 40 people who left the district. I know their stories, but I don't want you to know their stories. I want you to write your own chapter for this particular event. I want you to make sure that when those folks walk out of this district, they can say, that was a great experience, or I was promoted. Yeah, I was promoted, and I wasn't probably the best kid on the block, but I did work hard. And you have talented people working hard in the school district to educate our children. But what impacts them also impacts their family. Think about it. If it were your child, how would you feel, whether they're 12 or 40, if they were afraid to go to work, if they had to hire an attorney to feel safe? That does not need to happen in a district. We're better than that, and I know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. Mary, followed by Orville Townsend.
Hi, Mary Kenyon. I'm a parent of 2 students in the Iowa City schools at Lucas and at Southeast. And tonight I'm here simply as an ally in support and solidarity with the Black Voices Project, and to say that this is not exclusively an issue of concern in the Black community. This is a community-wide concern. We should all be worried about the fact that our students are seeing Black leaders, teachers, administrators pushed out by white privilege in our schools. I've seen it happen with my own eyes and among people who I thought I could trust. And it is insidious, and it is incumbent upon the board and the administration to push back against that privilege when that privilege comes to you with illegitimate concerns and refusal to follow the leadership that is perhaps different from what we are all accustomed to, because this district has not shown support for Black leaders in our schools. We know a certain method of leadership. It's what we expect, and when somebody else comes in and brings a new vision, we might feel uncomfortable, and that discomfort pushes up to the superintendent, and that needs to get pushed right back down to say, you need to sit with your discomfort. It's a fine place to be. We can all learn and grow from this. We need the leadership from the school board. We need the leadership from the school administration to say, this is a value we hold as a community, and you will join us in that value. We will not let you push that down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Orville Townsend.
Good evening. Orville Townsend, 713 Whiting Avenue. When I first began working with vocational rehabilitation, I worked for the agency about 42 years, but 20 of those years I supervised the rehabilitation office here in town. I remember when I was initially appointed supervisor of the office in town, I wasn't welcome because I was the only person that looked like me in the office. It was so ridiculous in the beginning that in the break room, one coworker just out of the blue said, wasn't no using the N-word, gonna tell him what to do. But I was fortunate because when it was brought to the attention of the state office, their attitude was they hired me. They hired me because I was qualified, and they were going to support me. Now, once we got the sewage all flushed out and prevented a toxic environment, my staff and I went on to serve citizens with disability in this community in a powerful way, because we became a very powerful staff. I mean, I had an excellent staff, but I was only able to work with that staff and help them to get to the point, help us to get to that point, because my supervisors supported me. We're talking about change. Anytime you take a black person, a person that's different, and you put them in an environment, we're talking about change. We're talking about acceptance. And it's very difficult to get good acceptance because that person is outnumbered. Success is only going to happen if the administrators or the people that choose that person will support them. But now, I encourage you, do not take a person that's not competent and capable, that does not have the credentials, and put them in a situation like that, because if you do, you set them up to fail. But now, if you choose a person and you put them in a job, you've run your process, and what you've determined is that this person is qualified. So I encourage you that in the future, once you put that person in that environment, that you will work with them, support them, and give them a chance to do the job. When things go wrong, anytime the person wants to make a change, some people are unhappy. They turn against them. It's so easy for the staff to start off turning against the person, and then basically it becomes infective. It gets to the parents maybe. Now, in the bottom line, our students are going to be the losers. So I ask you the question, do you put a person in a position like that so that when things don't work out right, you take them out of that setting and bring them here and put them in another position? Or do you put a qualified person in a position and give them the support that they need? Thank you.
Thank you, Orville, and thank all of you for coming tonight. Thank you all for coming tonight and expressing your views on that set of important topics. We'll move on to our agenda setting for the evening. We've got a January 28th agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
I move that we approve our January 28th agenda.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you, Kim. Consent agenda. Who looked at the bills this period?
Sean and I did.
Yeah, I didn't come up with any questions this time, but I think this is the fourth time I'll say it after reviewing the bills, that every time I see the amount of money we're paying for students in other districts, it hurts. And I think we need to do everything we can to keep our students in our district, and I think that speaks to the culture here too. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because it's a lot of money leaving when those students leave, and there's all sorts of reasons why they do, but it's definitely noticeable every time I look at those bills. So.
Anything from you, Rufina? Nope. Thanks. Any consent agenda items that directors would like to pull for discussion?
I'd like to pull number 12.
12? Any others? Is there a motion to approve consent agenda without item 12?
So move.
Second.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Item 12.
Yeah, actually, I pulled this one as a good update for the community, and I let Dwayne know, but with the sale of our bond the last time, at the last meeting, it allowed us to do some more work that we originally weren't going to be able to do on some future projects. One in particular that I wanted to mention, and I'm glad Chris is here, because the Shimmick school, when we voted on that, I was very uneasy about how we weren't doing a full gym there. The sale of this bond will allow us to do the full project there and a few other alternates, as well as Wickham. So I just wanted to let Dwayne have a chance to update us on some of those updates so that the public knew what was happening with those.
That's great. Thanks, Paul. Dwayne?
Well, first, I would say that the timing was right. We had 9 bidders, which means there's a real competitive climate out there right now. We also had a number of bidders on Wickham, but that helped. And bids came in a little lower than we had budgeted, and the original design program we had, we were fearful we wouldn't have enough money to pay for an entire gym. Turns out we do. So we're not only going to add a full-size gym at Shimmick, but we're also going to add the interior classroom alterations and create some corridors. That's kind of an open space. It's a really weird configuration that we have in several locations, but we're going to be able to put the corridors in, and we're going to be able to do terrazzo floors as well, which my guys love. So we're pleased that we'll be able to accept the alternates at Shimmick, and I'm sure they are too.
Can you cover the Wickham?
Sure, and
as well?
at Wickham, one of the alternates was to create a new secured front entrance. As you know, we have a couple schools where those offices are set back just a little bit. So we're going to be able to move that office forward and create a secured entrance at Wickham with that alternate and that bid process as well, so we're pleased.
That's great. Thank you. It's a good update. Appreciate it.
And with that, I'd recommend we approve the Appendix 9 approval requests.
Second.
Okay, I'm ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Public hearings. Sean, first up, Northwest Junior High School Asbestos Project.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the 2020 Northwest Junior High Asbestos Project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on January 14th, 2020. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on January 15th, 2020. The district will receive bids on this project at 10 a.m. on January 30th, 2020 at the Facilities Management Office located at 1137 South Riverside Drive, Iowa City, Iowa 52246. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on January 15th, 2020. Are there any questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public?
Thank you. Next up is the Borlaug Elementary School Addition Project public hearing.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the 2020 Borlaug Elementary Addition Project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on January 14th, 2020. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on January 15th, 2020. The district will receive bids on this project at 2 p.m. on February 5th, 2020 at the Educational Services Center located at 1725 North Dodge Street, Iowa City, Iowa 52245. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on January 15th, 2020. Are there any questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public?
Okay, thank you. That concludes public hearings for this evening. Next up, we have our policy review. Ruthina, the work of the P&G committee.
We're still tackling 400 series. I mean, that's dealing with our personnel body, so it does take a little bit more heavy lifting from all members of the board, but Brady has been very gracious to sit at the table with us as we have those discussions, and hopefully we'll have a very aggressive meeting schedule. We're working on a doodle poll right now to try and get as many meetings as we can to finish the 400 series. I'm hopeful, but we have a meeting scheduled for Tuesday.
Okay, before the end of the school year?
I'm hopeful.
What page are you on?
Like Wait,
But our
brutal.
last P&G meeting got canceled because of availability, so we're in the same boat as we were
Okay.
last time. We're on like 101.
yeah.
Out of
very
about how many?
intensive.
Just to give people a,
Out of how many pages?
101 out of,
78.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. It's a very long series since it does deal with our employment groups.
Great. Anything to add from anyone? Thank you, Ruthina, for the update.
yeah, and thank you guys for that work, too. I
Seriously.
know it's a big lift, and, yeah.
It's a lot of work. Thanks, Brady, too, for working on that. It's a big deal, very, very important. Moving into our presentations for this evening, the first up is the IASP data. I think, Diane, you're leading that?
Yes, I am. Nice job with the initials there. They have termed it ISASP, and that's always a little hard to say, so the ISASP works well. So this is the data that traditionally, the assessment that maybe when we were younger, we might have taken the ITBS or the ITEDS, then they changed to the Iowa assessments. And this is the first year that we had to administer the Iowa Statewide Assessment of Student Progress, the ISASP assessment to all of our students. And this is the data then from that assessment. Typically, this would have been put in the annual progress report that you guys received earlier this year, but we didn't have the data available at that time. So this is kind of a little addendum. And then by the time we get to the next fall APR, you should also then have this information along with our new information, because we'll give the test again this spring. So a little background on ISASP. It is definitely a different test than the old Iowa assessments or ITBS had been. Still created by the University of Iowa and still a statewide assessment, but different in many ways. So the state has really encouraged us not to make any comparisons between the way our students performed on this test and the way they had been performing on the Iowa assessments in the past. So that's why you see just 1 year's worth of data here and not any kind of comparison. But this is our baseline. This is where we're starting from. And then we hope that by next spring, we're going to start seeing some improvements in some of the data pieces. So the way the test was different, first of all, it was given in the spring. That was a mandate. In the past, we had always given our tests in the fall. But because of ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, all districts had to give a test in the spring. Also was different because we gave it online. We didn't have to. We were allowed to give it paper pencil, but 75% of the students across the state ended up taking it online. We chose to do that. And we really believe that in the future the test may become adaptive, which could help our students a little bit. So we decided to jump in with the online test this first time through. Also different because it was a multiple choice. There were certainly some multiple choice questions, but there was a lot of short answer responses. Students actually had to write. They had to do some manipulation on the screen, making, squares cut into certain fractions and things like that. So very much more interactive test than the old fill in the bubble sheet that we might have been used to. The reading portion not only included reading, but it also included other language arts elements. So we no longer are just getting a reading score, we're getting an English language arts score. So that includes language arts questions, reading questions, and a writing component. Students had to write 2 essays, 2 answers to 2 prompts. So they actually had to type in, starting in 3rd grade, typing in their long answer responses to some prompts. So much more comprehensive test than it had been in the past. The test was really designed to measure the Iowa core. So they really looked at what the Iowa core is asking our students to be able to do, and then they wrote a test to try to measure that. They offered us a test for 3rd through 11th in math and reading, and science was only grades 5, 8, and 10. So that's why you just see those. That's all we were able to give our students. Other changes. So probably the biggest change is how they determine proficiency. In the past, they had just taken our Iowa assessments, they looked at the 41st percentile and said that was the cutoff. This year, they did something completely different, where they actually looked at the test, and they had teams of teachers and community members come in and look at the assessments and look at them against what the Iowa core is asking students to do. And they had to really think about if a student was just barely proficient on the Iowa core in 3rd grade, how many of these 3rd grade questions would he have gotten right? And that's how they made their benchmark. And then they had to think about, okay, if a student was, this is a little harder, advanced in 3rd grade standards, how many questions would he have gotten right? And they did that for every grade, for every subject, and they then did kind of an analysis to make sure that it seemed kind of equal between grade to grade and subject to subject. And that's how they came up with their cut scores to say what was really proficient. So they really looked at the expectations and then how the test measured that. So they found across the state that generally students were less able to demonstrate proficiency on this test than they were on the old test when they were just looking at a 41st percentile cutoff. So we've seen that in our district too, that our percent proficient numbers look lower than they had on the other tests, but again, different tests, so it's harder to compare. But you can make comparisons, certainly in the data, you can make comparisons between all of our students and our subgroups. So you'll see that listed there in our data. And you can make some comparisons between our students and some of the state information that they gave us as well. They gave us some limited state data. I think in the future that's going to be a little more robust as well, so we'll have some better comparisons. And then also in the future, we'll be able to compare one year to the next and kind of see our growth in addition to just looking at 1 year's data. So that's kind of an overview of ISASP, and you have the data in front of you. So I guess I'm open to any questions.
I'll start.
Just,
I remember when it came out that we were changing test systems, and we sat up here and we talked about what that means and how it was going to be kind of difficult to compare current year to previous years. And I believe one of the things we talked about is, well, we kind of have to look to see how everybody else does on the new one as well. And you kind of look at, so we sort of have some of those statewide numbers that, it's a little concerning to me because we are below the state average in a lot of it. And, you know, we've always been able to kind of hang our hat on that. We know we struggle with our subgroups. We absolutely do, and that shows up here too. But we've been above the state, and that's something we can say, all right, we're doing something better. And now in a lot of it, we are below the state average. And again, it's an N of 1 to know what that really means. But it is concerning that right out of the gate, we struggled more for some reason than, you know, the majority of the state. So I don't know what that means yet, and we probably have no answers for that, but it's a concerning piece. And the one thing, I was just kind of scrolling through the part that we are the most below the state in most of the places is on our FRL category. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to be able to, you know, dig into that and tease that out and really figure out what we're doing there, because that one stands out particularly as being a bigger difference between us and the rest of the state. The other ones we are lower, in some places higher, but the numbers are a lot closer to each other. And on the FRL one, they're 10, 12, sometimes 15 points lower, and that's a big concern. I'm sure it's a concern for you guys as well, but that's just what stood out to me.
One of the things that stood out to me too was in the Hispanic Latino population that tended to be lower, especially in the earlier grades than our state cohort. And so again, I think we saw that in the previous test as well, and I'm just something for us to look at. And then, as Sean noted, just sadly, the traditional subgroups that are not performing as well as some of their counterparts, and that again gets back to our equity conversation. Some of the folks that were talking to us at community comment tonight about the equity in our schools and how we create environments where students can be successful, and we know climate is a consideration for our students and their achievement. So I do think, I'd love to get your take on this, Diane. I think administering the test in the spring is actually probably a good thing. It's more instruction time for students, so this is probably a better time to do the assessment. Yeah, I'm with Sean, you know, lower than the state, and again, it looks like, especially in the lower grades, the Latino population performing substantially lower than our state cohort, and it's just things to watch, right? And I don't know, are there other observations that you glean, I'm sure you've poured through this data, and Amy, you probably have too, and Matt and others. Any other observations you would kind of tease out of this baseline set of data that we have?
Mm-hmm. Certainly. So to your response about taking it in the spring, when we took it in the fall, I mean, those tests were normed against other kids taking it in the fall as well, so I don't know that that has much difference on the outcome, but I believe that teachers who've had the students all year long take a little more ownership in the data. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when you get the data back in the fall, you'd be like, well, you know, I only had them for 2 months and that's where they were. But now, you know, I've had them all year long, and so I'm going to really take some more ownership of the data and maybe accept it a little bit more strongly and then want to do something about changing it. So I think that's a positive thing. Certainly we've noticed those areas that we need to improve, and that's where your eyes always go to, right? The FRL, the Black population, the Hispanic population are definitely areas we need to improve. We do have a couple elements where we are above the state. So when you look at the proficient, there's also that advanced proficient category, and we pretty much in every grade level are exceeding the state in the advanced proficient. So we know we have a good population of students that we are rocking it with. We're doing really well with, but certainly there's a population that we're not. So we're kind of on the two ends there. And then that advanced group also helps our average. So there are some kind of the latter pages there where you see us compared to the state average test, and then we're above the state average as well. So, we have to be happy with some of the places we're doing well, but then look to see what we're doing well with those places and see what we can replicate to try to improve the areas that we certainly have some room to grow on.
One other area that I thought actually was trending well for Iowa City was the IEP student population. There's a number of areas where we were performing better than the state cohort, and I thought that was, I think especially in lower grades, if I'm remembering the data correctly. But so that's a positive. But yeah, so it's a baseline.
It is, definitely.
Just a couple things I would add is with both our IEP population as well as our ELL population, when they become proficient, they're no longer going to be coded in those subgroups. And so, we have to realize that component too. So yeah, we've seen the last couple of years some exciting data trends with our IEP kiddos, but I know as we continue to see those, then we'll probably be staffing kids out too. So that's kind of one point I would make. The other thing I think we're all excited about is the state's new MTSS data warehouse. A couple of years ago, they were using Iowa Tier, had some problems with it. Just had us using the assessment database that actually came with the FAST assessment. And then this year, released Panorama across the state. And right now, it's housing our K-6 reading data. And why I bring that up is that data warehouse is going to be able to house a lot more data for us. So we'll eventually be able to bring over math, attendance, behavior, things like that. In fact, the state has asked us to pilot that even this spring, even though the rollout of Panorama is fresh and new. The other reason I bring that up is we've had a hard time of continuing to aggregate our data. So now with Panorama, we can go in and aggregate it further. So when we see that our African American kiddos typically are only 50% proficient, what else do we know about the population? We can go in and see per building or collectively as a district, how many of them are being served in ELL versus coming out of poverty. So that's nice that we have our hands on a tool that's able to do that, not only at the district level, but at the building level as well. It tells us more about our learners. It tells us more about the direction and the types of programming we should be looking at. So I would offer those few comments.
So Amy, you have an idea of when the board will be able to begin to see some of that more in-depth analysis of?
Are you talking about the Panorama piece? So what we bring to you so far with that right now is housing the K-6 literacy data, which is the FAST data. And so we bring that to the board on a regular basis. It was in the APR report also this fall. But we haven't published anything that would show further disaggregation or aggregation of that data. But we can play with it and start to do that for sure.
Okay, and can you comment how this data is being used within the CSEP structure, building to building?
So we were given the information, I think, early November, and the buildings have had the last month or so to just populate that, right, and to take a look at themselves. We've shared a PowerPoint presentation with them, so staff is just understanding and getting their arms around understanding what the new assessment says as well. So it's all fresh for everybody, but it's certainly a component that lives within the building CSIPs at the elementary level and at the secondary level, as well as our FAST assessment data. So.
And how does this, how do these results this year fit within the CDEI plan?
Yeah.
C-Deep.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think back to Goal 1 where it's talking about supports for our students that are structurally disadvantaged, right? And it talks about access to programming, strong MTSS systems, being able to evaluate that, ensuring that that we've got the right kids placed and that we're not closing doors for kids or inadvertently putting them into tracks that are going to keep them behind, you know. And that's the work that we've embarked on. Just this afternoon, we had a further discussion around Goal 1 with the directors of teaching and learning and the work that we're doing to try to put together action steps to make those plans come alive. I would say with some of those instances, with some of those critical tasks, that work has already began or it's ongoing, and for other pieces in the plan, it's new work.
Okay, good, thank you.
I have a kind of left field take on this. How much time and money do we spend on preparing and carrying out these tests? Do you know?
Last year was a big lift, and Diane really was the one that did that big lift.
Yeah, to really, I mean, staff time, probably quite a bit, you know, to learn how to administer the test and make sure that we were following all the protocols correctly. I'm trying to remember how much student time. Each test, 2 hours, I'm thinking maybe 4 hours, maybe 5 hours, if the grades that had to take science
Right.
had to
do
spend
the
on the test. Mm-hmm.
And the reason I said left field is I know we can't opt out of testing as a district, but parents can opt out, but the local school board, as I understand it, has to determine what the punishment is for that,
Right.
or if you're going to punish someone. And the only reason I say that I brought that up was because I'm not a big fan of standardized testing, and I think we could do more with it. So I'm just throwing my comments out there that I think our time could be better spent with our teachers and our student staffs by not having standardized testing. So I'm just making a comment more than anything else, but I'm not a big fan of these overall, so just.
So I will just
there.
remind you too that there's a website that's going to open up tomorrow, the Iowa School Performance Profiles, that helps to rank schools across the state and also helps to identify schools for ESSA that might need targeted or comprehensive support. And they really value the student achievement on ISAFs quite a bit. So they give us points for how many kids are proficient. You get points for how many kids, or what your standard, your average standard score is. You get a lot of points for growth. So that's really the key, is how kids are growing from year to year. But you also get points on participation. So how many of your students are taking the test? So if we were ever to drop below 95% of our students taking the test, then we would probably end up with a few issues with the state. So I would hopefully not encourage too many parents not to take the test. Right now, we run about 99% of our kids are taking the test.
Right, and so it just is, again, maybe illustrates my point a little more, is if we're basing things on how many kids actually take a test for funding is a little silly, based more on what we need to help our kids with the, early childhood intervention, things of that nature. So just my 2 cents.
I'll jump off of that a little bit. How much time do you think we're testing total? So FAST, all the different assessments, and, from my perspective, this does give us data, and if we can aggregate it further down to the individual student level and the building level, find places where things are working really well, and find out why, then we use it to improve student performance. I guess my issue with this is, I know now we're not comparing this to Iowa assessment, but from what I can tell, the disproportionality is the same. Mm-hmm. And I think for as long as I've been paying attention, it's always been the same. And so I haven't seen any change in disproportionality at all in 30 years. And so I guess I would ask, what's being done? What's the state do with that data to help us say, we see the gap, we recognize the problem, and we just keep recognizing the problem, and we say, well, it's still there every year. And I have to believe it's connected to what the folks at Community Comment were saying, right? That there's a culture here, that there's something going on, especially if the tests get better. If these tests are better designed, they're actually assessing what we're teaching, they're a lot closer aligned, so there's something else going on, right? It seems, and I don't know, but from other data we've seen, we can pull black kids out, and we can account for SES, And black kids from middle-class wealthy families still are disproportionate from their white counterparts. So I think that's a part when we're constantly seeing data, what are we doing with it? And then where's the result? I have to imagine somewhere it's probably working pretty well. Sometimes, we're going to be testing kids that just showed up on our doorstep. And that data is probably not as useful as a kid who's been here their whole career. And so that, to me, I think the further we disaggregate it is great. And then what are we doing with it? And this isn't unique to Iowa City. I bet this data is very similar across the state and across the nation. I'd like to think, with the direction we're going, with the amount of conversation, with the community engagement we've had around changing these things, that we may have the political will to really make some big changes. But that's sort of the fuzzy mystery, and maybe it's not a mystery. Maybe people who live it and feel it are like, oh no, I kind of have a sense of what's going on here. But I guess that's the frustration when the data is always the same. It's a couple percentage points maybe, but there's no trend to say, hey, we have figured out a few things. I'm not a silver bullet person. I don't think there's one answer, but we're not on. It's. I guess that's a frustrating part, to have community commenters say, here's been my lived experience, and here's how your system sort of reinforces that. And we hear that again and again, and here we are. And I know there's work being done, but it's, I don't know that work is seen in the community very, very much. I think that, from the community comments tonight, it feels like it's not. Like maybe the system is giving lip service, but then not making the changes. Because this is the same data I saw when I was teaching in the district, and this is the same data that there aren't any changes. And so, again, not looking for answers. And I don't know, to Paul's point about standardized testing, it doesn't seem to be helping. And maybe it is, maybe that's just a naive thing. And when you really drill down, you can say, oh, here's what we see. Here's where we see the successes are, but overall, these numbers are just very static, and then you're like, well, then why are we testing? If we are spending all this time and money on all these different tests, what's the end result? What are we getting at? And so I guess I share. I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater. When data is used well and we can really dissect it, I think it can be very, very helpful if we do something with it that affects positive change, but it is hard sort of every year to look at the numbers and say, well, there it is again. So I don't know what you can comment to that, but.
I just had a quick question, and I think I know the answer to this, but are we able to get the same type of data for other school districts? Because I see for the state of Iowa, we have pitiful proficiency rates for our Black and brown students, just as a state. So I'm just curious, is there any district in this state that can actually educate, get our Black and brown kids proficient? Because I know it's not an isolated issue to Iowa City. When we're looking at those numbers are sad across the state for those two groups. And as a community, along with all the other school districts, we should be pretty ashamed that we can't do a better job for our students. So I'm just curious, do we know? Is it possible? Is there anybody out there able to educate our kids to where they're at least getting more proficient rates than what they have on a state level?
So Diane was just sharing information about the Iowa School Performance Profiles that are going to be released tomorrow publicly by the Department of Ed. And there's a way, once you're in the website, anybody can do it, it's not special for administrators, but that you can see a scatter plot of where all the building attendance centers fell out across the state. So if we knew enough about a district's or a specific attendance center's demographic, and they were outperforming what we were doing, we could certainly be talking to those schools. So that scatter plot now exists for us.
I would just love to see that, because I mean, as we see from those numbers, it's not just unique to our district. And I mean, I'm not a silver bullet type of person, but we really have got to do something to get those numbers up, not just as a district, but as a state. So if there's something out there that's working, I'm willing to look at it and find out how can we get that here.
Did any of you happen to catch, there was an NPR series in October, it was 4 Monday evenings in a row. I just happened to have the radio on, and they were talking about the historically where we've been with disproportionality in the country, and it really took a 50-year look, and each Monday they kind of took a different component of it. I don't know if anyone listened to it. It was really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of theories on why we haven't seen movement. They had different individuals on talking about where there were some isolated incidences of success, but by and large, I think you're going to the story that we're seeing play out here locally, statewide is also playing out, unfortunately.
But there are pockets of success, to Tina's point, and if we can't find them in Iowa, I'm guessing we can find other districts or even schools within districts that are actually making a difference. I mean, I think about the schools we visited in Minnesota where they had the magnet programming at elementary, junior high, and high school, and they had some academic outcomes that were fairly impressive for a demographically diverse student population that was similar to ours in Iowa City. So it's the sad thing about seeing this data year over year over year, whether it's one assessment or another assessment. I mean, it's almost, you just get inured to it, and that's the problem. You just get used to seeing it year after year, and you lose the energy and the drive to actually try to do something about it. And to do something, to actually make a change in these educational outcomes is going to take a level of persistence and discipline and drive and innovation and doing stuff that we've never done before, and probably do have to do some measurement along the way to see if what we're doing is working. We haven't. I just feel like we're trying lots of things, but are we putting in that specific energy that we need to really make this needle move? And it's, you're right, it's a national problem. It's a national shame that we've been seeing for decades, and outcomes of institutionalized racism and the stuff that we've got in our equity plan. But how do we do something in this district to make a difference? So maybe we can look at other models. Maybe we can look at some targeted interventions. Maybe there's some things we can do in a pilot basis. Do something really, really, really different to try to make a change here.
Turn something on its head.
I'm really intrigued with your comment, Amy, about the state producing data now to do building by building comparisons, I guess. And I think, along with Athina's notion, is that could actually help us to get, as board members, to get some idea of what maybe we should be doing that's really different. And I think we have a data report coming up for the CDIP plan in April, into the first quarter. Perhaps if that's possible to get some of those results into that reporting, report.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of finding successes and trying to learn from that, but it is pervasive, and I think we need to be that pocket of success. So all of those other school districts around Iowa are saying, what are they doing in Iowa City? And that's what we got to figure out, right? And I think we do have the political will or the energy or all the word. I think we, not just the board, but I think we have with the district, like we have the urgency and the will to do it. And we just got to do the work, and you guys are doing the work, and we got to figure out how can we support you during that work, because we have to make a change, because we can't keep looking at the same numbers. That is really easy to, I mentioned how we were doing against the state, and we use that as a good for us, we're better than the state, right? It's easy to then forget about everything else. I'm not saying that you were, but it's easy for anybody else that's looking at it from the outside to say, oh, well, we're not doing too bad. Well, not doing too bad is still failing half the people, right? And that's not where any of us want to be. And so we need to do the work and figure out how we will be that pocket of success, regardless of what the rest of the state's doing. And we need to find out what the next concrete steps are, and I don't know what they are. And so maybe that we do start with finding somebody that has those successes. I do think a lot of the talk about just the culture and the climate in our school district, and stay tuned when we do agenda setting, we're going to talk about that. That is a huge piece to it here. And I think it has to start there, because all of the programs you do inside the schools don't mean a lot if people aren't comfortable being there doing those things. So it is a big problem for us specifically, and I want to look at us specifically and how we're going to be successful, and then we'll just start blowing the rest of the state out of the water, and then we'll have everybody coming to us. So we're going to do it.
And I think there's a recognition too that this takes a lot of time to actually get to the change that we're talking about. I mean, the district we saw in Minnesota, I mean, I think they'd been implementing their magnet programs, Steve, for like 10 years or something, and it takes, when you think about students in elementary or pre-K and working their way through, so it's persistence, it's continuity of drive, and, staying the course, right? And we do have a lot of things that we've brought in, whether it's AVID, which I think is helping. We've had some great presentations and experiences shared from AVID students. There's a lot of things that we're doing, but we just have to be very focused in making sure that all these pieces that we're putting into play can come together in a very, organized, methodical. I'm struggling for the right words. You know what we're talking about, I think. But there's a focus and there's a drive that we just have to put in place here. So when we talk about Portrait of a Graduate, maybe that can help us too, and as we think about what that looks like for our students. We can't lose sight of this. This is why we're all sitting up here at this board table, is to try to make a difference for our students' educational outcomes.
For sure.
Any other comments? Steve, anything that you'd like to add? I'm sure you've poured through the data as well. Okay, we can move into FY21 budget assumptions. Leslie?
You have the document in front of you. I guess the two important pieces is to remind of what the calendar is, which is in the process section there, that first paragraph. So it has to be certified by April 15th, and so we look at what board meeting falls directly before that and kind of work backward from that. And so you see over the next 3 months, you'll have a presentation from most likely me and some from Steve as we move forward through this process and make the recommendations. I don't know if anything was shared today when you were in Des Moines, Steve, but I haven't seen any bills come out yet. Do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. So JP and I went to Des Moines today to IASB's Day on the Hill, and the news out of Des Moines wasn't great. And they're projecting supplemental state aid coming at 1.75, which is certainly well under the governor's 2.5 recommendation, and you could kind of feel the air immediately deflate out of the room as soon as the news was passed on. I don't know if they're trying to set our expectations low so that if they come in at 2.2 or 2.3, which would be under the governor's recommendation, now we're all happy because it's not 1.75. I don't know what mind games may be taking place in Des Moines, but we were certainly sold a scenario that we should expect 1.75.
And that would mean that you'd have to adjust your...
Nope, I'm getting there, Charlie.
Okay.
So hold that thought.
All right, okay.
In our discussions, we have planned our budget that we've put it together thus far at 1.5%.
I was going to say that, but I'm not confident enough that I know what's going on here.
So, so we would be able to move forward a little bit to 1.75, but that's clearly not enough. But one of the tables in would be in assumption 3, have a little comparison there of what allowable growth does from 0 to 2.5% and what it does for the district. And so I don't have 1.75 in that table there, even though I do have it computed. I have it computed for every 1/10% between those. So you can kind of figure it out. Between 1.5 and 2 would be about a 3.75 as a round number. So that's what it means for us. Fortunately, we have the 286 student growth that's driving this. And so At this point in time, we don't have our demographers' projections to project our student growth any further than next year. So that's kind of the next step as we develop our current budget, is to look forward to do planning together for the next 5 years. We did have a very nice taxable valuation growth, as you can see in assumption 2 of a little over 6% this year. And so, you know, that's above our 10-year trend line of 4.6%. So that's a very positive. So that does good things for our rate in the general fund as well as for our debt service fund as we do the bonds. And so there's just the rest of the assumptions. These are kind of the standard assumptions that we work through each year. We're looking at, there's no change in IPERS this year, which is a large cost because we're an employee-driven organization. And we're also looking at our health insurance cost being able to be flat. And we're reviewing our third-party administrator for that plan as well to contain those costs and provide better service to our employees and as well as our providers in the community. So, you know, that's an important part of a health plan as well, as the providers are out there serving our students and families. So, so we've looked at that. So everything else is in there. You have some trends, some ratios, and that type of thing. Is there anything in there that you have questions on at this point?
I don't have any questions, but I will say that earlier today when I was reading through this update from the Senate, or the House, there was an education House study bill that went through that set state supplemental aid at 2.5%. So it is still hopefully out there.
And unfortunately, the message that we got was that the House would pass a 2.5 SSA, that the House would push the 2.5 number out. The cut is going to come from the Senate. So that's where we need to look at
that, and especially if they're fiscally minded, that the amount of money we spend on kids now saves us money in our prison system and our social services down the road, that this is an effective way to spend our dollars, because the truth is the difference between 2.5 and 1.75 is all political. It's all choices people are making. If you have stories about that really helps our legislators, who are very friendly to this funding. And this is not partisan. It's partisan for some people, but many of the most optimistic things I heard today were from Republicans who support public education. Some of them don't. About 97% of Iowa's students are in public schools. And last year, 24 out of the 150 legislators didn't have kids in public schools, that's not a priority for them. And so it's those folks that really need to hear, you know, for the greater good, this is where we need to spend our money. I mean, we have the things we are being asked to do in mental health, for example, the kinds of things our teachers are seeing is driving people out of the profession. You know, 25 to 35% down as people going into teacher prep programs. 15% of those people don't complete. And so teachers are fleeing the profession. They don't feel trained. They don't feel equipped to deal with what they're seeing in the classroom. And that all requires training and funding. And if we don't see it, the costs come out. You know, we have to deal with it. We're going to have to deal with mental health. We're going to have to deal with behavior somehow. And it's a lot more effective. So again, if you know people across the state who can reach out to their legislators to bump that up, you know, it's an election year, and, you know, 2.5 is not enough. You know, they've conditioned us to accept, oh, we'd be so happy to get 2.5. But thanks to you folks, we've done the work to know 4.5 is what's going to make us whole. You know, that's what's going to replace 10 years of a lack of growth. And it's too critical. The needs are too great. And I've been, frankly, really enheartened by the number. You know, I have my assumptions like anybody else. You know, this is a Democratic issue. But I've been really encouraged by the Republicans I've spoken to who really believe in public education, and they want to see that 2.5, and maybe even want to see, you know, a 3.7 or a 3.75. That's going to make us more whole. So the people out here who get it, the more they hear from the public, the one thing that politicians care about is getting elected, and people have to vote them in. And so we need to, the more we can spread that message, the better off we're going to be. And I'm speaking loudly and longer because I know our folks are good. Our legislators support us, and we need to get the message out.
Most of them. I mean, we were at a legislative forum this weekend on education, and we heard Bobby Kaufman say numerous times to us that we prioritize education. We spend the most on education than any other thing in the state, but he would not answer a question about teacher retention or the lack, he did answer it, but in the wrong way, about the retention of and hiring of teachers of color. I mean, yes, he is a Republican, but he spoke very highly of education, but he didn't really speak very highly of increasing that level of what we needed for education.
True.
I will also add that they did a detailed walkthrough on the governor's budget with us and talked about the economic forecast and the REC modeling and the supplemental, the rainy day fund and making sure that's full. And the 2.5 that the governor is recommending is 100% doable with having all the safety nets in place. And so it is not an issue of the money not being available. There is a very easy, clear path to 2.5 that is fiscally responsible. And I think that's an important messaging point, that when we're talking to other people about this, we should focus on. The governor found a way to do it very responsibly, and we can do 2.5. We should be asking for more, but 2.5 is not a hard lift for us this year.
So I'll just point out to remember that this is the budget assumptions. These are the framework that we use to build our budget. And Leslie mentioned it, and JP mentioned it. I draw your attention to the bottom of page 2. And a reminder that when we look back, do our 10-year look back, the average increase in our budget year over year is 4.4%. And that's both to drive the work that we do every day, give us the opportunity to explore some of the new things that you've seen in the last few years. You'll note that to get to that point, we're north of 2%. And so, you know, that conversation that you heard today about them coming in less than 2%, you can see where that falls. When you look at both the state percentage of growth and then how that impacts us with our student growth, and that falls below our do everything we did this year, next year process. So we've already started the work to determine what our budget looks like. These are the assumptions that we will use to craft that final budget. You'll see it on a regular basis every couple of weeks for the next few months. And again, our goal is to get you to that board meeting right before April where we can pass a budget. I can tell you that having worked with Chase and worked with Leslie, we will not find ourselves in the position that we were last year. We're not going to come to you telling you we need $3 million worth of cuts in order to make our budget balance. Our struggle will be, and we've had many conversations about this, both at the board table and work sessions, about recovering. That recovery is really dependent on the state deciding to adequately fund public education. So we're confident in the hold fast position right now. That's not where we want to be. We know we lost 21 teachers in the elementary classrooms last year. We lost a dozen teachers at the secondary level. We've got administrative positions that are unfilled. And absent an ability and a willingness by the state to move north of where they're at, it will put us in a position where it will be harder for us to look at the appropriate replacements that we were hoping to see based on that adequate funding from the state. So just FYI, keep that in mind as we move forward. We won't be talking reductions, but we may be talking very limited additions as we move forward.
It's a little bit different perspective, I guess. I just wondered if we've been able to share this basic financial projecting with all the unions and the non-represented staff in a way that they can see what Leslie and his group is doing?
Sure. So one of the first steps that we do in the negotiations process is they make a request for documentation, and Leslie's very well versed in this, and so he provides them all of these sheets. Brady and his team get access to information, as do our colleagues from the SEIU. And then we have a very open door policy about going back and forth because we want to make sure that everybody has the same information when we get to the bargaining table. Charlie, that's a great question, and we saw that play out last year. It was very helpful
for them to have that information. And so we'll continue to give them everything that we have so they can see that when they do their costing as well.
Okay, thank you.
And as we work through the budget process and we consider what the implications are on staffing in terms of where there might be additions or where we may have to flex folks, that's part of those every other week meetings we have with the ICEA leadership, so we can share with them our thought process, where we're at on that, and they can give us their feedback on it. So we get that, if you will, on a real-time basis, so that we use that as part of the process of building the budget.
Okay, thanks very much.
Les, I'm trying to see if it's in here and I'm missing it. What point in the year do we find out for sure what the medical premiums, if they stay flat or if they're going, like, when do we get that info?
It won't be until probably March when we'll finalize that. Our renewal date is actually April 1 for our health insurance plan, and so we meet next week, and that will be part of that discussion, the preliminary renewal and moving in to the final rate setting would be the goal of the March 2nd insurance committee meeting, to have that information. So they before they'll even give us that rate information, they have to have 9 months of claims before they'll stand behind any of the rates they're giving us. And so that's the December, for us, April to December period. And so we just coming off of getting those data to do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the budget assumptions? So we're off into the races in our process. Thank you, Leslie, for that overview and discussion from directors on those assumptions. Next up, we have action items. We've got an action item on a board resolution authoring issuance of bonds, appointment of paying agent, and approval of tax exemption and continuing disclosure certificates. Is there a motion to approve this resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Next up is our resolution to approve SBRC application for Grant Elementary first-year staffing costs. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
President Godwin, I'd just like to chime in on that. You've already approved it, but if you go back to our 2015 projections, we had $540,000 listed as what we thought it would cost us to open Grant Elementary for additional costs, new staff. And so we're just a hair underneath that, but some of that has to do with decisions that the board made throughout the course of those 4 years, where we right-sized our elementary buildings and shifted our boundaries. We didn't have that information in 2015. So I think we did a pretty good job at that point in time of projecting where we would be when we opened a new building. So it's one of those things that we're able to do just one time when we do that building. And so we've done it in 2015 with Hoover, 2017 with Liberty, and now with Grant. So we probably won't be going to them in the very near future, but with 286 students growth, it may be sooner than we think. So
No, very good. Thanks for the context, Leslie. Appreciate that. Our final action items are voluntary transfer secondary. Any comments or discussion on this before we?
I'll throw something out, well, a couple things out. One, we discussed this at the last board meeting, and we discussed kind of a short-term action and then some, long-term investigation of maybe changing what the plan is. And we suggested that, we weren't going to make any decisions without two of the board members sitting at the table. And so we suggested having it as a discussion item. Director Ressler actually weighed in and was like, I'm okay with putting it on there as an action item, and if we decide we're going to punt it later, we can always do that. But if we continue the conversation tonight and we're ready to take action, we can take action. I said I would ask Ruthina if she was okay with that, and I never did, so that's on me. So it's just on there as an action item, Ruthina, but that's why. So if you don't feel comfortable making an action on it, we don't have to do that. My thoughts on it now is that I think we need to make it the same at all of our secondary schools, and the easiest way to do that, like, in a short term for what we want to do for fall is striking the one line that's in the policy that closes Liberty. I don't know that I want it completely open or completely closed. I still don't know where I want to land for a long-term thing, but I think in the very short term, that seems like the right thing to do. The feedback I have gotten from our principals and from parents, and this is me putting on the North Liberty hat specifically, is that it's very easy for people to leave Liberty to go to Solon or Clear Creek or some other neighboring district if they can't go to City or West. Okay? I think they should all go Liberty because my kids go there and it's awesome. It's got great teachers like Brady there. So that is a concern that has been voiced to me, so I thought I'd throw that out there as a thing to think about as we look at probably our more long-term thing. Like I said, I have not landed where I think we should be because I do think the reasons that we closed elementary transfer are still valid. But I also think that secondary schools are a different beast than elementaries, and so I'm still kind of waffling there, but it would be my suggestion to take action to open Liberty this fall and continue the conversation of what we want our long-term secondary voluntary transfer policy to be.
So if I agreed with you, how would I vote tonight?
Well, there's no motion.
Made a motion, yeah. I wanted to get kind of some feedback before I even made a motion to do anything.
And honestly, Sean, I'm going to be on the other side of that. The first time that we decided to do this was in 2016 before the school opened. I think it was 16. Correct my math, I was wrong. But I was on the 4-3 vote, and I was the 4 in favor of closing Liberty. And part of the reason for that vote happening then was because we weren't sure what the numbers were going to be. The school wasn't 100% finished, and we were concerned about overcrowding. We still haven't finished that school. It will be done here soon. But my other issue with it has a lot to do with what we are trying to do as a district in balancing our schools. I really would like us to have this discussion about secondary as a whole, again, because I think it's valid now that especially since we have an elementary plan in place. I'm concerned that if we open it up and then have this discussion about opening or closing them, and we decide to close it, then we've gone from closed to yes, it's open to no, it's closed again. And then we have to make a bunch of exceptions for kids that were already there or coming into the feeders or whatever it may be. I think if we're going to have this discussion, I think at this point in time, I mean, transfers are due, March 1st? So we're, a month away. I would just prefer to leave it as is, have the discussion, and have it ready to go for the next year or whatever year we decide it's going to be. So that's just my brief thoughts on it.
So wait, I want to make sure I understand. You wouldn't like to have another discussion before we make a final decision on voluntary transfer for next school year?
If you're going to make a motion tonight to open it, I would vote against it. If we're not going to have action on it and leave it as it is, then yes, I would like to have that discussion before we start the next school year so we have it done in time.
Yeah, which would mean in our next board meeting, we would need to have a discussion.
No.
No, I
I'm
think
not
what you're
understanding,
saying,
I'm sorry.
What's here tonight as is
Would stay for
would
the 20.
stay for the upcoming transfer cycle, and then we dive into a
Oh, I
deeper
see.
discussion on
Instead-
secondary open transfers and make any changes
Got you,
because
for
it's.
the 21, 22
Right, because
school year.
it will be, if we do ultimately decide to close all of them, like,
Or open.
but I'm saying if we opened Liberty tonight based on the motion, and then as we have a deeper conversation, we go back to closing all of them, then I think that's creating more work for us, because then we would have opened it, kids transfer in, and now we have to deal with a bunch of exceptions, or do we not, or parents that's upset that, wait a minute, you just opened it and now you're reversing it.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit in the last meeting, I think, around that risk of making this change and then changing our minds later. And I think there was some, I wish Matt were here, because he probably is a little deeper in the content, but I think we
listened to
agreed
it.
we didn't want to do that kind of knee-jerk, change it one year and then change it the next year. I mean, we did recognize that that was an issue, that we didn't want to go down that path.
Yeah, I think the conversation was something along the lines of, this was a fairly easy change that's not taking something away from somebody, right? So it was easy to do, but that's a total valid point, that we weren't taking it away, but maybe we would then turn around and take it away in a year. I mean, that's a completely valid point. I think it behooves us to have that conversation and work out what that policy is going to be sooner than later, because in the meantime, if we don't take action, we do have a not equitable situation between our current high schools. And
Sean, by that you mean in regards to voluntary transfer?
yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, specifically,
Yeah.
we have it in, for other
No,
reasons
I
too,
just
but
wanted to- yep.
specifically in regards to voluntary transfer, it's not the same.
Right.
At all of them. So if we
I'm sorry.
continue that way, it will not be the same.
So Sean, the policy is different, or the numbers are,
Right now, Liberty is closed to transfer into,
right,
and everything else is open.
okay, all right.
I don't know where that stands on open enrollment from other districts. I think it's all based on enrollment, their capacity, or what we decide to let people do.
People may open enroll into the district. They may express their preference for where they choose to go to school. We retain the right of assignment. So given the fact that Liberty is closed to voluntary transfers, it's currently also closed to open enrollment, and we advertise that as such to people who are applying for open enrollment.
Steve, when we make, or when you guys make those decisions, I guess what are the criteria you use to decide where folks are gonna, where you would assign?
Elementary is a little more complicated. Obviously, secondary is a little bit easier. They usually come to us with very specific requests based on where they live. And then we look at it in terms of timing, if those open enrollment requests come in on time, and that gives us the opportunity then to consider staffing. That makes it fairly easy for us to usually grant them their first choice. Elementary is a little trickier because that is based on available seats in the school. Sometimes families come to us with 2 or 3 kids, and it may be there's room in this grade but not that grade type of thing, so then Amy and I have to go through and look at them all literally on an individual basis to see where they fit. So secondary is much easier. As long as they come in on time, we have the ability to control it through staffing. We can usually give them their first choice.
And so it's pretty much capacity?
Yes.
Is the driver, okay. You know, my with the open enrollment, with Liberty being closed, and with Sean's comment, I mean, about our net out of open enrollment, I mean, that's kind of the issue, is Clear Creek is right there. That's super easy to get to. And that, you know, or do we lose folks that we could capture to Clear Creek and Solon from just geographically speaking? And that's...
But the people that are geographically close to Liberty that would go to Clear Creek or Solon would be in the
Already in
Liberty
Liberty.
group already.
I mean, for people open enrolling in from other districts, like could, you know, would they be?
To try and gain open enrollment from outside the district in exchange for the equity that we're trying to create within our district. I mean, if we open voluntary transfers, you have to provide your own transportation to the school. What places are going to do that, or what people are going to do that to go to Liberty?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I do. I know it's an issue. You know, I struggle with this one. Yeah, I do. It is. You know, we've got this one outlier, and we do some things to try to balance that out. And
So it sounds like we should have to me, a bigger discussion on this, which is why I wouldn't want to open it with the possibility of having it closed again very soon.
Yeah, no, I hear you there. I don't want to be
and
whipping
I-
people around back and forth.
I think in our discussion last meeting around that risk, I think what we said was if we opened it up and students did start voluntary transferring into Liberty, and if we did change the policy, we would have some kind of grandfather exception in the policy for a period of time for that family to kind of rotate through their 4 years or 3 years or whatever it was. Do you recall that? Didn't we say
You
something?
did.
like
Yeah, I
guys
that?
talked
think,
about
I think
it a
any
little bit, but-
policy is going to require some sort of plan as to what do you do with current students, right? I mean, we did it with the elementary. I mean, we got to figure it out one way or the other. I'm perfectly fine with not taking action on it. I just, like I said, I don't want to have this unequal policy in place for a long time, right? I mean, I think if we're not going to take action on it, I think it's going to stay in place for the next school year, and we will spend
Which I think is
time
okay.
to figure out what we want to do the years after that, and
enough.
making,
But it-
with the idea that the 2021 school year is
The
when we
target.
would implement whatever that new plan
Right.
is.
Which I'm totally fine with too, because if, like I mentioned earlier, the 4-3 vote, the first time, the 4 votes mostly argued that they were looking at enrollment numbers and talked about having the full high school open, and next year will be the first year, correct?
Yep.
Next year will be the first year that we have a full high school open. So, I mean, like, it'd be nice to see what those numbers are before we start opening it to whoever.
The first time that it'll have the capacity as a full high school?
Yes.
Because it's at its current, like, 4 full grades size,
But the spaces.
but the space isn't done. Which is why I wanted to have the conversation to see if we were going to make a change for the fall when it'll all be done by fall, right? Yeah, Dwayne says yes. So, like I said, I'm okay with not making a change to it. I don't know, if we're not gonna make a change, I don't know that we even need to take action on
We
it.
just don't take action.
But I would then ask that we have that conversation in, the next, month or two. So, like, I don't want to be making a voluntary transfer policy as close to the start of
No,
the
I-
following
but
school
I
year
don't-
as we did with elementary.
But I don't know that we need to do it in the next month or two. I'm probably going to make a pitch like I did, have been on other things, is let's get through that portrait of a graduate and understand sort of what we're trying to accomplish educational outcomes-wise in our district that might have an impact on what we would choose to do from a voluntary transfer. I mean, I don't know. I don't feel, if we don't vote tonight, I personally don't feel a big rush to get to it next month. We've got lots of other things that we want to talk about. I think we've got time to get through the strategy work, the portrait of a graduate, understand what that means, let it sink in, and then take this on over the summer or early fall, give parents plenty of time to understand what the policy transfer would be, what the change would be for the next school year. That's my take.
I'm going to sort of agree with you. I think some parents would have a different idea of what plenty of time is.
Fair enough. That's fair.
But also, I mean, it's a pretty big decision, right? And then I think we have a lot of things we do want to talk about, and we talk about how we have a lot of things we want to talk about, and then we never talk about them. So I'm gonna keep mentioning it and expect you to keep pushing it till later, and that's fine until I get to a point where I was like, we can't wait anymore.
I
So
don't think
that'll
this
be my
will-
job.
I don't think this conversation would be as long as we took for elementary.
Probably not.
I think it's a lengthy discussion, and then you make a decision.
And while I'm in favor of waiting for a lot of stuff for Portrait of a Graduate, that's not going to be completed maybe until May, and then digestion will be after that. I'm not sure this is necessarily linked as tight to that process.
See, it's hard for me to know without having gone through it, to
Yeah.
see what our community, we've got this large group of people who are going to engage with us and talk about what they want our schools to be like and the outcomes and things like that. I mean, it's hard for me to know whether it will have an impact or not.
But if we go through Portrait of Graduate and the outcome is we should have voluntary transfers at all of our schools, like, are we going to change elementary then too? I think we still have to do work that needs to be done.
But we've got an opportunity to get a very robust set of
Yeah, but we
inputs
just-
into,
I agree with Sean, we just keep waiting though. Like, I do believe in the work the Portrait of a Graduate is going to do, but there's other stuff that needs to be decided. And if we just need to look at that.
And I think there are pockets that this is a very significant issue for. I think the majority of parents in our district just want a decision made so that they can move forward, and they just want some consistency from us and information so that they can plan, and just for us to make a decision.
Here's what I'm gonna say. Like I told you, when we get to agenda say, I've got like 3 things I'm gonna fill the next 3 possible work sessions with it, and I'm not even talking about voluntary transfer yet. So I would suggest sometime after that, and I'm okay with it being after that, that we even just have that conversation as a work session to get a feel for where everybody's head's at, to give administration some direction on here's what kind of policy we want to see, because it is going to have the exceptions to the rule, because that's just how we roll here, right? But I said the last time is that I think we should make the rule and then figure out the exceptions and not make the rule be the exception.
I agree.
So I think we need to at least figure out what do we want the rule to be in general and give that direction to Steve and the team.
For the 21 school year. I think what we're saying
It
tonight.
sounds like that's
Sounds like what we're
where
doing tonight. We're
most
giving
of the board
direction
members are
to our
leaning.
community by saying the voluntary transfer policy is not changing for the 2021 school year. And so that's direction that families need for planning for next year. And then we'll, as a board, take on another conversation to see what changes we want to consider going forward for the 21 year and beyond.
Would it be, it seems to me that whatever happens with, so portrait for treasure is a big thing, and let's just say the community says we want 3 magnet high schools, right? And we can go anywhere we want, something huge like that. That implementation, right, would take years, right, to actually do. But this, so I'm wondering, it seems reasonable that we could have this discussion by the beginning of the next school year. And so that people kind of have that whole school year to say, kind of here's our plan, because I don't want to do it in January and February.
Completely agree.
Close to the deadline. So at least we could maybe commit to finishing portrait graduate and then over the summer, but commit to have some decision, some rule, by mid-August, by the beginning of the next school year. Is that fair?
Yeah, like I said, I don't think this is going to be a long process. I think
Right.
it's a work session discussion and a discussion at the board and a vote.
And a vote, yeah.
Good target.
Okay.
So we are not acting on this action item tonight, and I don't think there's anything else we need to do with that. Is that right, Kim?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Good conversation. Next up, legislative update. We've already covered some of this in our earlier budget assumptions discussion. Anything else folks would like to add?
I would just remind folks that we're in the season of legislative forums, so we have our own forums here. Everyone's welcome to come to those. The League of Women Voters had their first forum, which we had 4 board members there, so I'll let them add any comments that they might have. The first one focuses on education. The next ones don't necessarily focus on education, but they take questions from anyone on any topic. So just a reminder that those are the Saturday mornings after our Friday afternoon forums.
The district's not a sponsor of the additional forums?
No, we just sponsor with the ICEA that first forum.
Each one has a different theme.
Yes.
to it.
I wasn't able to attend that League of Women Voters one, but I was there the day before here when we had one, and we had a really good discussion. We actually had a pretty good number of legislators show up. I think we had 5?
Yeah.
So we had quite a few, and we had a lot of discussion, sort of getting the updates. I think it was probably then repeated to a certain degree the next day, probably with a little more detail, but it was nice to hear some of the work they're doing in regards to children's mental health. We did get some of the same sort of, hope for nice SSA, but don't expect it really kind of talk. I think there's a bit of a, feeling of being beat down in that area. And I just don't feel the energy like, yeah, we're really going to go out there and get it. Which is, I don't know, I guess that's frustrating to me. Like, I know our legislators are supportive of it, but I want them to be cheering for it, right, and really being out there. So I get it, because I feel kind of beat down from the years of bad numbers too. But I did like a couple of the points I made, particularly children's mental health was a big one, and I'm trying to remember a couple other key points that we really hit on Friday that they had some couple positive things that are sort of some bipartisan bills going through that were nice. But.
I'll just, I did my soapbox before, so I'm not doing that, but remind folks that next Monday is the caucus, and we were reminded continually how grateful the parties have been with the cooperation of ICCSD in making our buildings available and really doing it for that public good. So that was expressed specifically by Representative Masher, both Friday and then again at Saturday. And so thanks to preemptively to all the staff that are going to be at those buildings late, Dwayne, your folks that are going to be locking up and making sure. I will say my party's rules are no food and drink. So hopefully we won't be cleaning up wrappers, but you know, if you got to feed your kids, you got to feed your kids. So it's our rule, you know, whether people follow that or not, I think is up to the individual, but just remind folks, caucus is next Monday, Lisa.
So
Monday.
everyone can drop their kids off at JP's house before the caucus so they can eat dinner there?
Very generous of you,
Since
JP.
they can't eat or feed their kids at his
Lisa, you
station.
choose to follow those rules or not, but.
I was thanked last night from someone who said, I see in the calendar that there's no school on Election Day, and they were very appreciative of that. So that was, I think that's a nice change that we.
Just a reminder, we worked with the calendar committee so that moving forward, our major election day now has the ability for us to have students out. We may have staff in, depending on how our PD day works out, but obviously that's much easier for us to work around adult presence than it is to have all the kids in the school. So we're really excited about that. We can't do all the elections. We'd be in school on July 4th. We try to avoid that, but we can certainly hit the major elections, and I think that's where we get most of the concerns from parents.
Very good. Anything else?
So just a comment on the legislative forum Saturday too. It was encouraging to me to have Senator Walz in talking about setting funding amounts for the state. To note that he'd like to have more discussions, maybe at the legislative level, about what funding amounts should be. What do we need to be doing? How many teachers do we need? What does the pay need to be? How many paraprofessionals? A number of things like that. And I personally thought, and I mean, this may be a minority opinion on people that were there Saturday, I thought Representative Kaufman was responsive, very interested in that approach. So while it is obviously important that we concentrate on the amount of state aid formulas, I think that, frankly, that there are some possibilities of looking at discussions with both parties in the legislature about looking at what we're trying to do with schools and what our needs are and how to meet those needs.
Okay, anything else, folks? Thank you. I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend either of those, being out of town, but looking forward to the upcoming sessions. Agenda setting, we've got a P&G meeting on the 4th of February where the remaining 400 series is going to be back on deck.
And all wrapped up.
One more meeting, folks, right? You're gonna gut through it, okay.
We'll get further along, especially having great committee members and
Director Ressler?
Yes.
Okay, good. So P&G on the 4th. On the 11th, we have a board agenda in front of us. We've got a consent agenda, presentations, annual enrollment and demographics report, Q2 financial report. We'll have certified budget update, and then our director liaison legislative update and agenda setting. Anything else for the board meeting? I know we've got things to discuss for work session.
Apparently Sean has the meetings full with
But these are all work sessions, so anything else for the?
I have work session suggestions.
Yep, anything else for the 11th full board meeting?
Did we put crisis response team at the work session on the 11th?
Yes, on the 11th,
Okay.
correct. Right, isn't that right, Steve? Matt's,
We'll have one on
we've got the, those I've lost the names of the social. Thank you.
Social media.
Gaggle, securely, yes.
Well, it depends on what's on Director Eyestone's list.
But we've already agreed on the crisis response. That was on deck for the 11th, so we agreed on that in last meeting. So,
What's on his list?
go.
Well, I know this is going to be kind of a letdown maybe from the big
Yeah.
reveal. So Charlie and I met with Superintendent Murley yesterday and had really good conversations about a whole lot of things, really. But we were trying to distill down a lot of the, I guess, comments that we're seeing either by email or somebody calls us up or we're hearing it in community comment and really trying to take actions on moving forward. So one of the things we talked about is that, you know, it's sort of the common themes is the climate cultures in our buildings and how it's affecting the students' perspective specifically. We did talk about staff and administrators, but we're kind of focused on the students. And one of the things we thought would be a starting place, not the ending place, was to flat out say, look, we've heard these stories. They're not good. They've happened for a long time. They're still happening. Let's look at what we're doing now to address those and see, is anything working? What can we do to fix it? And give the opportunity to our secondary administrators to come in and say, here are all the things we are trying to do to address these things that we have heard, right? Because these are not new stories, right? And we know that things are being done in places in different ways. And I think from a starting point, we need to know what is being done and then how we can help support growing that. So that was the one topic, and I think that needs to be probably sooner than later because I don't think we can minimize our student experience any longer than we have to. Another one.
And that
Go
I
ahead.
think is beginning to be responsive to our community comment folks tonight in terms of having discussions at the board table about climate in our schools. And so you're especially looking at secondary in this conversation.
I think that's a fair place to start. I don't think we want to just open up everything.
But I do want to make sure that we're responsive to those commenters tonight because they clearly, we need to address those concerns, and I think this is a way to start. So thank you, Sean.
And like I said, it's a starting point, and it is specific towards, I think, probably student and just, I guess, general culture in the building, which I guess has an effect on the staff just as much as it has the students. But it was from the perspective of the students and the student experience that kind of prompted the conversation, I guess. It doesn't have to end there. The other one that we talked about, a lot of issues have, and a lot of emails have been coming up just about general class size across the district and how you'll have one school here is really big and one over here is really small, but it's this one little blip here and a blip over there and a blip over here. And part of it is a function of our RAM model. You know, it's all a function of how much funding we have. But I think that, you know, last year to this year, right, we changed how many tiers we had. And I just gave the example when you look at our goals, right, from 1 to 5 for K2, right, you have this, I think the lowest end is 21, 22, something like that. And the high end's like 29. That's a huge range, right, for a kindergarten class. And so I want to have a conversation as to, you know, how do we move RAM forward and still, you know, meet the needs of our students. I don't want to start plucking individual teachers from here because somebody's complaining about that one and putting it over here, right? That's a little too knee-jerk reaction. But if we can have kind of a bigger picture discussion of, is there a way we can, you know, restructure those tiers that then you get the result you want without creating other problems? Maybe the answer is not, right? But I think it would be good to have just a bigger discussion on how we implement RAM. I think RAM is the right thing to do, but it does create issues just because of where we're at. If we had unlimited funds, we could make it perfect, but we don't. So is there something we can do to make it better within our limited funds? So it's a big topic. That was a lot of me talking, but you could just call it RAM, but that's one. And then I want to make sure we get Paul's request of discussing vaping and having the students that are they've written in the newspapers with some articles on it. So I want to make sure that we get that on there
Well,
before
Steve
it's
had
lost. And we had a date for
25th.
that, I think.
The 25th.
I think we want to make sure we're getting these things done, right? We don't even have a work session scheduled tonight. So I think it behooves us that we try and get as much done on these Tuesday nights that we're all here. And so I would like to see those three things, I guess, along with the fourth thing, I guess,
Right.
that Lisa brought up, to hit them in the next 4 meetings if we can.
So on the 11th, we've talked about crisis response. I don't know if we'd have the energy. I don't think our board agenda is too big on the 11th. From a standing meeting, could we also cover the secondary climate concerns to just have that front and center? I mean, those are two pretty big topics. I mean, maybe we need to spread those between the 11th and the 25th.
Although I'm not sure how much time we're going to spend on crisis response, because my understanding is we're going to review the job description.
And then the gaggle and the
give direction
securely
to
thing.
say.
We thought we could
post
do
this
both
job.
of those on the
Let's do both.
25th.
I would prefer to have the secondary climate discussion
that's-
sooner rather than later.
And then vaping and RAM, we could look at on the
On the
25th.
25th.
I,
All right.
I will say with RAM, what we learned in Des Moines today is there is optimism that we'll get the SSA number by February 13th.
Right.
That's the legal deadline.
And that's what we were hoping for, because then one of the things that I talked with Sean and Charlie about was if indeed there is some light at the end of the tunnel and it's not a train, what we would need from you, which would be very beneficial for Amy and Chase and I as we start the staffing process, is to understand we lost 21 elementary teachers last year. If we are replacing some of those, where do they fall in the model? And that was the conversation that Sean and Charlie and I had, was getting some understanding from the board about that would then help us decide what kind of tweaks we would want to make to the RAM staffing for next year.
Okay.
Because I would be curious in the RAM discussion is there room in the model to push the top down from 31 or 30, whatever the trigger number is? Can we get that top number to 28? But if we simply aren't going to have the money to do that, I also want to know that. And so it seems if we could delay that just slightly to maybe we get the SSA numbers, it would be a really productive discussion.
And they also, the gentleman did a nice job of saying, okay, given the way the RAM is structured, can you bring some scenarios to us? What's the cost of moving our highest need schools from 2 back to 1? What's the cost of moving the schools that were moved from 5 back to 4? So Amy and I can start modeling that so that then you better understand, rather than looking at the model as a whole, if there are some incremental steps in there, what is the cost associated with doing that? And then as a board, can you help us assign some priorities so that we can use that for both staffing and budgeting?
The 25th should be good. We know on the 13th. That should give us some time. Is that enough time?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So just to kind of comment on that, just one thing that's been repeatedly coming into my mind as far as adjusting RAM, in my mind, kindergarten is different from every other grade.
That's what I was just going to bring up.
And it's the kid's first experience. They can't tie their shoes. They can't go to the bathroom sometimes. So that, to me, and then it's a question of, okay, so lower class sizes, is it more helpful to have a para? Okay, so those are some things I'm wondering about kindergarten specifically. And then in regards to the RAM model, as far as supports go, I think class sizes based on our percentages is pretty good. But if we have a very large building, 600 kids in a 250 kid building, thinking that in that 600 kid building, maybe your percentage isn't very high, but you just have raw numbers of kids with behavioral challenges and different things. What's more, one, how much does it cost, and what's more beneficial? Are lower class sizes more beneficial, or is it more beneficial to have a full-time SAM, another student family advocate, the people who are providing those supports to that classroom, and then, are those supports something that we could put on a slightly different model to make sure that, if you've got 35 kids in a building, those 35 kids need this level of support, and maybe that's done in class sizes, but maybe it's just done with additional.
We could definitely bring you our model for doing our assignment for our building facilitators too. And then I did actually share with Charlie and Sean your thoughts about kindergarten. JP and I had talked about, should kindergarten have its own RAM level
Yeah.
that's separate from the others? And so that was one of the ones that I had shared with them. And we can bring back, again, a cost model for that.
That's good.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Good. All right, well, we've got work sessions set on the 11th with crisis response and our secondary climate discussion on the 25th. We've got RAM and vaping. We've got an agenda set for full board meeting on the 11th. I think we're doing pretty well. I do want to make one comment, and I might ask Steve for some help in describing this. Tonight, I believe, is the last night that we're going to be streaming live on YouTube. Is that correct, Steve?
So we have a recommendation that there is concern that's been expressed that absent real-time closed captioning, which we do not have now, we have access to it through a delayed process, approximately 24 hours, that when a public body provides a service, it should be delivered in a non-discriminatory manner, presumptively in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act and other applicable statutes. Live streaming the broadcast without closed captioning is likely a compliance issue with those legal standards, and the recommendation is that until we've had the opportunity to investigate how to go about effectively closed captioning our videos and whether or not we can do it in real time, that we should move to that delayed process. So I've had the conversation with Kristen, who's not here right now, about doing that investigation and getting that done as quickly as possible so that we understand what the cost would be to try to do real-time closed captioning. Attorney Holland indicated that his initial review was that it's likely cost prohibitive to do that. But again, concerned that our current process of live streaming may very well be a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, raises this as an issue of timeliness, and hence bringing it forward to you tonight.
So it would be very good to get that on a upcoming agenda, the analysis from that review that Kristen's going to do in terms of the cost associated with the real-time closed captioning. I think that's something we need to aspire for, and I don't know how long it would take Kristen to do that analysis, but
he is working on it.
I hope that could be maybe on our meeting on the 25th, perhaps.
I will check on that right away.
Okay, that'd be great, thanks.
So, I'm sorry, Janet, for the 11th, did you include a response to the community comments tonight?
In the work session on the 11th is when we're going to talk about the secondary climate, which is a beginning of a conversation that came from the commenters tonight. I'm not going to suggest that we're going to be answering all of their questions directly in that one session, but I think it's a way to begin or continue to have the discussion around climate in our schools and how that's impacting teachers, how it's impacting administrators, how it's impacting students.
Okay, so it's kind of a two-thing, or, okay.
Anything else? I guess we're ready to adjourn. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.